Anna and I have been looking forward to being with all of you. And I always have to say, I would much rather be with you in person, but this is what we have, and I'm delighted to see your faces. I just want to say a bit about why we think this is important. So part of what Anna and I are going to be doing with you today is really talking about some skills that will help us become better allies. So a lot of the work, particularly for white people in helping dismantle racism, is becoming better allies. And we think that some of these skills and working toward the development of them is going to assist in the work that we do wherever we are, in our homes, with our families, in our communities, in our workplaces. And it's also both the book and these skills are dedicated to our ongoing commitment to heal from the damage that has been done by participating in a racist society. And when I say damage, and we'll talk more about this, we've all been hurt. White people have not been oppressed by the system of racism, but we've been both privileged and damaged. And one of the things we really want to look at today is reclaiming our humanity and healing from some of the damage that's been done through no fault of, we got born into this system, but the more we can wake up, the more we can really become active in assisting this country becoming a more equitable place for all of us.
Some of what we say may be new for you. Some of what we say may be distressing for you. It's really important for you to notice your body as well as your thinking when you go through this next hour and a half with us, because our bodies give us information sometimes that our minds don't. So just pay attention. If you notice tension in your body at any point, breathe through that tension. See if you can just be with yourself and hang in with us. One of the really important pieces of being an ally against racism, or of being a person who's oppressed by racism and just dealing with it, is patience. Patience is hugely important, and a willingness to deal with discomfort is important. So if you're a person who's used to having things be comfortable for you and discomfort throws you way off, just see if you can hang in with us today and just breathe and notice how you're feeling. I think that will ultimately be helpful for you. The work of ending racism is ongoing. It's not going to end. I laugh with my son and I say I'm trying to eradicate it before I die. Been doing this work since I was 12. And he laughs with me because we know that racism will be here for generations after this one, regardless of how devoted and dedicated the current generation seems to be to changing things. So it doesn't end, but it gets easier. It gets easier to do as healing happens. It gets easier to be an ally as understanding grows. It gets easier as we all realize that we all are impacted by this system that we were all born into, that none of us is responsible for creating, and that we essentially inherited, and we have to address if it is ever going to stop hurting people. So just pay attention to how you feel as you go through this time with us.
What Anna and I want to do is just to spend a few minutes reading some excerpts from Combined Destinies as a way of getting some other voices into this space that we've got today. And we're really focusing on the voices of how racism has damaged white people, how we have been hurt by this system. So this first one is a man named Bob Zellner, who is a civil rights activist and grew up in the South. And he says, In his first conversation with Anne, one of the things he spoke of in terms of the impact of racism on whites, he spoke of the murder of the soul. So this is Bob. When I was asked to write about how race discrimination has damaged white people, my mind was forced to shift gears. We usually confine our thinking to how racism has harmed those it is directed against. And I had never thought about the ways in which I was harmed. In reflecting on this assignment, however, I am realizing that racial hatred's persistent, deep stain on our present and past has hurt us all. This is from Deb Burke, another contributor to the anthology. Why did it take almost 20 years after my friendship ended with my African-American friends for me to grieve the impact of racism? In retrospect, I think there were no spaces in my white world, no openings whatsoever to talk, think, or feel about race. I spent the first 14 years of my life in a predominantly white suburb in New Jersey. Our family then moved to a predominantly white rural town in Ohio for 2 years, and then to a predominantly white suburb in California for another 2 years where I completed high school. I have no recollection of learning about the accomplishments or contributions of people of color to our nation. There was no discussion of race, racism, or white dominance in my K-12 schooling or my university experience. The world I lived in did not allow for the possibility that a white girl or a white woman could feel sorrow about the loss of her friendship with 2 Black boys and the existence of racism. When race did surface in my conversations at family gatherings or with other white people, racism was talked about in terms of how it caused suffering for people of color. We did not consider how racism had gotten into our bodies and minds and how we were perpetuating it. The cumulative impact of being in a family that denied authentic expression of emotion while living in a larger social world that did not allow intellectual or emotional space to think and feel about race led me to quietly sever a piece of my own soul. Thus, I was able to evade accountability about my participation in a system of racial dominance. She goes on. There are layers and layers of intellectual, emotional, and spiritual work involved with wrestling with race and racism. I've worked through grief and anger that sometimes overwhelmed me. As I moved through despair, I then discovered another layer that contained shame about being white and participating in a system that has caused such profound suffering. When I slowed down enough to feel the bodily discomfort of shame, I was able to transform it into forgiveness and compassion for myself. In moving through the pain that I had buried about racism, my anger, my shame, my grief, I've discovered a deep, warm, powerful place in myself, my humanity. It's within my own humanity that I find renewal and strength to continue to address racism in the different realms of my life. And I just want to read a bit right at the very end in the afterword. The way that Anne and I organized this book is, and you'll see it with the titles of the chapters, is identifying the ways in which white people have been hurt. As we read the stories, we noticed the prevalence of themes of separation, shame, guilt, silence, and sadness, as well as the various forms of resistance to racist conditioning that many of the writers employed. Although some of the writers had thought deeply about racial issues before joining this project, very few had done so in relation to the ways in which they were personally hurt by living in a racist society. Even fewer had done so in writing. For most of them, writing a personal story was a challenging and courageous task. Many expressed difficulty as they began to look at their feelings related to witnessing or actively participating in racist behavior. Several people told us that they had stories to tell and were interested in writing and never wrote them. I actually knew immediately, I'm going to read this, but this is about me. I knew immediately that I wanted to participate in this project, yet every time I started to even think about putting my thoughts down on paper, I began doing something else. So from the very beginning, for me, I've had to think about my resistance, my ambivalence, and my hesitation to either look at and write about racism and what I might do to help myself. One of the ways that I avoid my feelings of shame, guilt, despair, and grief, and those of you who are on this call who know me, I think know this about me, I experience irritation and frustration instead. That this is one of the ways that I avoid doing some of the work that I need to do to continue to heal. But constant immersion in this emotional material, both while working on this book and now being on this journey where Anne and I have really traveled all over the country talking about combined destinies, it's increased my ability to be with and notice my emotions, not run away from them, not turn them into anger, not try to avoid them, to just be with them. So I offer that as I'm on an ongoing growth journey along with all the rest of you.
So Caroline, in addition to being hurt by the racist society, by the racist system, by the system of racism that has damaged the humanity of white people, you're also participating in a system that oppresses people of color. And it is your racial privilege that oppresses people of color. So I want to make you understand what I mean when I say racial privilege or white skin privilege or white privilege. Okay, and I'm going to do that, if it's okay with you, by asking you some questions. All right?
Yes.
Okay. When I want to ask people who are in this workshop to please just breathe through this. If you have some reaction, okay, just notice what's happening with you when I ask her these questions, and she's not going to have to say anything. I'm just going to keep asking her questions until I finish, and then maybe she'll say something then, but please just notice your bodies and breathe. Caroline, you as a white person don't have to take on the job of educating other people about your group, or wonder whether or not the treatment you receive from most people is about your racial identity, do you? You don't have to worry about whether a bank you deal with is racially discriminatory or in its lending policies and practices. And you don't have to think about whether or not you've been hired or not hired or included or not included in a group because of your racial identity, do you? Caroline, you don't have to think about racial issues every day when you go to work or school or church or the grocery store. You don't have to hear people tell you to go back to wherever you came from. I don't think that you pray that the next generation of children in your racial group will continue the never-ending and enormously challenging work toward the elimination of social injustice. And you don't have to listen to people completely dismiss your cultural heritage and your past and present experiences with racism by saying that they don't see color. You don't have the experience of being treated with a lack of respect because of your racial identity. And I don't think you ever listen or ever have to listen to people generalize about your racial identification group based on their experience with one or two people in that group. Caroline, it's not necessary for you to listen, for you to learn to interact cross-racially, whether you want to or not. For you to listen to white people, whether you want to or not, you're free to walk away from that. Caroline, you don't have to stay conscious of your racial identification when you're renting an apartment or leasing a house or buying a house. And you don't have to stay conscious of your racial identity when you're walking down the street or shopping in a store or having a barbecue in a public park. I don't think you wake up in the morning worrying about your children being racially profiled by teachers or school administrators or police officers. And unless you're part of an interracial family, you don't have to worry about your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren experiencing overt and covert racism for the rest of their lives. Caroline, your life experience does not include experiencing nightmares and daymares based on past racist treatment toward you or toward others that you love. And you don't have to strive to be better than most in order to be seen as good enough. Because you're white, unless you belong to an interracial family, I'll bet that you don't spend any amount of time and energy worrying about the men in your family, your father, your uncles, your sons, your grandsons, your cousins, your husband being profiled and physically abused or murdered because of their racial identity. Caroline, you don't have to grieve for the pain they experience because of racism or hold concern about their physical and emotional health being negatively impacted because of racism, the stress that racism creates. And it's not necessary for you to know about the customs, attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, history, social institutions, and achievements of any other racial identity group in order to survive and aspire to thrive in this country. I believe you have never been asked to tell what all members of your racial identity group think about a member of that group who has become a public figure or of some kind. And you never have had to listen to coworkers or other students when you were in school imply or clearly state a belief that you were hired or you won a scholarship only because of your racial identity, nothing to do with your competence. You have never had to listen to anyone imply that you are not good enough simply because of the color of your skin. And I'll bet you've never been told that you're an exception because of your competence. You, my dear friend, Caroline, have a great deal of racial privilege. Hopefully you understand what I mean by that.
I do.
Just notice, please, what's going on in your bodies and in your minds. Okay.
And what we're going to invite all of you to do is to just spend some time reflecting on both the readings as well as what Anne was just talking about, and jot down, and you can put the PowerPoint up if you want, to just spend some time noticing how you're feeling and what do you think you used right now in order to stay present, and just jot down your responses. We're going to give you about 10 minutes, just time for yourself.
So I want to begin this section of the workshop just by talking about some of the skills that we've invited you to pay attention to today with us. So empathy is the most important thing, I think. The ability to walk in somebody else's shoes mentally, to imagine what it would be like to be that person. When I was a little girl, my favorite book was called Somebody Else's Shoes. I have really looked for that book as an adult, and it's way been out of print for many, probably for decades. But it was a wonderful story about a child that went into a shoemaker's place, and he had a bench that she could sit on, and beside the bench he had a shelf, a small shelf, and on the shelf were shoes that he had completed fixing, and they were waiting for the customers to pick them up. And the little girl only had one pair of shoes. She was very poor. So one pair of shoes had holes in the soles, so she was there for him to fix her shoes, and she had to wait for quite a long time, so she fell asleep. And when she was sleeping, she dreamed that she put on the shoes that were waiting to be picked up. So there were various kinds of shoes. There were the shoes of a very fancy woman, and there were the shoes of a professional person, and there were shoes of a little ballerina. Anyway, she put on these different shoes, and as she put on the shoes in her dream, she became that person. And she really became the person in her dream, and she felt like that person felt, and she knew what that person was about. And that was my favorite story. And I think that a capacity for empathy was really what made it possible for me to even imagine doing this particular anthology that I have ultimately invited Caroline to join me in, to ask white people to talk about how they felt, because my work as a therapist with white clients gave me a window into the realities of them. And so I think that it's a very, very important skill. It's extremely important if you're going to be an advocate for anti-racism or anti-racist behavior, to be able to imagine what people of color are experiencing, which is really the basis of the reason for asking Caroline those questions and having people understand what we mean when we say racial privilege. There is a book out called The Empathy Effect. I just found out about it. I think it was written and published last year by a neuroscientist, a woman named Helen Reese. The title is The Empathy Effect, and it's a resource if this is a skill that you want to work on. She actually has exercises that focus on that. Empathy is very different from sympathy. It does not mean that I feel sorry for you. It means that I know what it's like. I can imagine what it's like to be you at this time, at this moment. Compassion is also very, very important as a skill. And I think you have the definitions there. Basically, it's about wanting anybody who's suffering to stop. I want your suffering to end. I don't want you to suffer anymore. And if I feel like that, then I'm being compassionate. I want to help buffer the stress that you are experiencing. Self-reflection is important. We need to be able to look at ourselves, think about ourselves, hang in with the imperfections that we experience. Recognize that none of us are perfect. Human beings cannot be perfect. And it's okay that we're not perfect. Actually, life, I believe, is really about learning lessons. And so when we learn that of an imperfection or that we hold, or something that a part of us that we wish we didn't have, then we have some time to work on changing that. But we can't make changes if we're not willing to look at ourselves. And if we are to be actively involved in trying to create social justice for all people, then we need to be able to see where we get in our own way, and attempt to work that through, so that at least in that one sphere that we've identified, we're not getting in our own way. Open-heartedness is about kindness. It's about generosity. It's about not being judgmental, about accepting people who they are, how they are, and getting involved with their changes if they invite you to. But essentially, just being capable of holding them in your heart, even when they are behaving in ways that you wish they wouldn't. And the willingness to change requires loving oneself. It requires lots of practice, lots of identification of what I want to change, and a great deal of patience sometimes. Because if we've lived a lot of years in been a certain way, then changing that way of being is not easy. But it's a skill we can develop for sure. And we can get help with that when we need it. If I want to connect with other people, I have to allow myself to be vulnerable. One of the wonderful things about Combined Destinies was that the writers, all of whom were very courageous, were willing to be vulnerable. They were so willing to be vulnerable that they all signed a paper saying that their first and last names could be used in the index of the book. So there was not one writer who wanted to hide. Not one writer who was not willing to say, this is what's true for me, or has been true for me, or is a way that I've been, something that I've experienced that I'm not happy about. And I'm not trying to hide that from people who read the book. So that was a huge gift for all of us. Vulnerability is what increases connection. If I'm not willing to let you see who I am, then I'm going to feel distant from you. You will feel distant from me. We won't be able to really deeply connect in any way. Most white men in this society, my experience anyway, is that most white men and most Black Americans, most Black American women have been taught to be afraid of vulnerability. It's really hard for many reasons. Okay, there are many reasons for that, mostly based on childhood experiences of being hurt when being vulnerable, early childhood experiences, and modeling, white men modeling their dads not being vulnerable, Black women modeling their mothers not being vulnerable, all because of, I think underneath of all of that is fear. So it's very understandable. And it also gets in the way of connection. And so if we really want to understand other people and we really want to connect with them and know what they are about, we need to be able to let them see us too. And for many of us, that's not easy. But it is a skill, and it's something that if we want to learn how to do it, we can learn how to do that. It takes a lot of courage to, for some people, to embrace their own vulnerability and to treat others with respect and to want to be connected. And then the last skill that I'm going to talk about is the capacity for listening. Really listening to people, listening to oneself and listening to someone else, which means eliminating thought about what I'm going to say. If I'm listening to you, I cannot be listening to you and really thinking about what I want to say next. As soon as you shut up, I'm going to say this, or I'm disagreeing with you while you're talking. It means giving up the need to be right. It means just being able to be present for that other person, for whatever they want to say. And then taking time to think about that, if it's important enough to think about, and responding after the thought, not while they're talking. Sometimes we don't want to do that. Sometimes we really clearly do not want to deeply listen to somebody else. And that's where self-reflection comes in, is we reflect on that and make a decision. I don't really want to listen to you. That's clear. But to pretend that we're listening when we aren't, pretend to ourselves that we're listening when we are not, gets in the way of, again, of connection. It gets in the way of understanding. It gets in the way of learning. It gets in the way of our own personal growth. And it is a skill. All of these are things that can be learned.
So I want to discuss the next 7 skills. And I also want to say that, one of the outcomes of this book, as Ann and I started really doing book talks, was we started generating this list. And the list is ongoing. So we've continued to add to it and to continue to reflect and think about what we as humans really need to learn how to do better. I would say these are life skills. The first skill that I'm going to talk about is curiosity. And I've nicknamed myself Curious Caroline because it helps me remember that I don't know what I don't know, and that I'm working at being more curious as opposed to certain. That I don't have to know it all. And didn't you like how that came out? Know it all. How we talk about people being know-it-alls. The really good news, as I've observed in the last several years, is that there's an enormous amount of resources that have been compiled and are available to all of us to continue to learn. And that seems to be growing with each year. And I'm very grateful for that. So, we need to read books, we need to read poetry, we need to read the works of people from different racial groups and just continue to educate ourselves. And I'm going to say, and to wonder, so that we really develop the notion of wondering. And I'm going to ask us to remember, if we can, children are naturally curious. Children are naturally wanting more information. They don't have as developed an ego as adults yet, and they know that they don't know things. So I think maybe I would say, in terms of curiosity, is to become childlike again with what you want to learn and what you don't know. I'm going to talk about that. I was going to talk about this later, but I'll talk about it now. Another real outcome of Combined Destinies was the formation of an organization. It's not an organization, it's a group of local people called Whites for Racial Equity. Some of you on this call I recognize as participating in our meetings, but I would invite all of you who identify as white. We have monthly Saturday meetings, the second Saturday of every month. And it's an opportunity for those of us who identify as white to really work at unlearning our racist conditioning and to learn more about what it means to be active as an ally in assisting in the elimination of racism. We also have developed a website that is full of really, really great information. I would encourage all of you just to roam around the website and take a look at what we have put on there. And that's another ongoing, when we find more information, we put it on the website. So another skill is courage. Anne and I both have mentioned that for many of the contributors to this anthology, it took a great deal of courage for them to be willing to write their own story, and that part of the process of breaking the silence was also their willingness to have their names included. And this is ongoing work. Courage is, I think, it's action all the time. So we can feel afraid and then we act courageously. And then that'll happen again and again. So it's sort of like developing your courageous muscle. The more practice we have at being willing to move out of our comfort zone and really do something that we're feeling scared to do, it gets easier. I would also say that we can't really be courageous if we're not willing to make mistakes. So we really, I'm a big believer, and particularly when we're talking about racism, people of color see us much more clearly than we have a tendency to see ourselves. So pretending not to be something usually doesn't work. We show up. So we might as well just be courageous and make mistakes, clean them up, continue moving forward. Anne had said earlier, you know, mistakes are really unplanned learning opportunities. One of my personal favorites is patience. It's important that we remember this is long haul work. This is not, we're not going to fix this. And I have had the privilege of two very important white men in my life, both my father and then my stepfather. And I learned from both of them this kind of urge to fix something. Something's wrong, it's got to be fixed. And that isn't really how undoing learned behavior or undoing a whole system that's been put in place long before we got here. It's not going to get fixed overnight. So the developing of, I'm in this for the rest of my life, and this work will continue after I'm gone. I want to mention or some of you may know this, the California Endowment, which is a fairly large organization, has really committed to doing what they're calling an 80-year strategic plan. And I think this is very bold for an organization to really recognize that they are going to be trying to put a plan in place that is going to outlive everybody that's currently working for the endowment. And a lot of the work they do is really around racial justice. The next skill is a sense of personal responsibility. That one of my ongoing commitments to myself is that I am responsible for working to create a world that I want to live in. And that means that I have to continue to practice all of these skills. And I was talking to another friend of mine recently, and she and I are also involved in the National Coalition Building Institute. And something had happened and I was feeling impatient and irritated. And she's aware that Ann and I have put this skill list together. And I said, Sue, I do this skill list because it's stuff I have to practice. So each one of us has a role to play in ending racism, and the roles are different. That's why we need huge teams to do this work, and we need an assessment of what our capacity is, and then doing what we can. And the same is true for a sense of organizational responsibility. Any organization that we participate in, if we're employed, it's where we work. If we're volunteering, it doesn't really matter. Some of this might be our churches, is that we are responsible for assisting the organizations in which we participate to do diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And I think that there is often a feeling of overwhelm. These problems are so big. But if we don't start the conversation, who will? And I think sometimes we sort of sit on the sidelines thinking, well, this isn't really my job. So I'm going to invite all of you today. It is our jobs collectively, and then to figure out again what part we play, and then to commit to doing whatever it is you say you're going to do. A very critical skill is the ability to apologize. And apologizing for the impact of what we've done, not our intention. So there's a quote I wanted to read. If you acknowledge and accept your mistakes, what I see are not your faults, but your goodness. If you make excuses for your mistakes by claiming your goodness, all I see are your faults. That's a great quote. And the ability to apologize again is it's something that we have to practice. And I was reading something of Lee Mun-Hwa's. And Lee Mun-Hwa, for those of you who don't recognize that name, Lee Mun-Hwa became very well known in 1993 when he produced a film called The Color of Fear, and it is still widely used across the country. It's a group of men of different racial identities who spent a weekend together really wrestling with the notion of racism. But he wrote some steps to how to apologize that I thought were quite germane to what Ann and I were talking about. So I just want to go over a couple. So in terms of learning how to apologize, communicate what you're apologizing for. So be specific about what it is, and to discuss what you've learned. And before the incident that you are apologizing for, reflect on your stereotypes or your biases. Do a little bit of self-reflection on what might have been going on for you internally. And I said this earlier, take responsibility for the impact, not the intent of whatever it was that you said or did. We've talked about, some of these are all the skills we've just talked about. Be curious and open. Feel and express remorse, empathy, and compassion. Then the critical part also, follow through by changing your behaviors and your attitudes. One of Ann's and my deepest beliefs is that these are learned conditions, and anything we've learned, if it's not useful or beneficial, can be unlearned. We have the capacity to really do this work. And then finally, I would just say a movement toward forgiveness, and to forgive self as well as others. This requires really letting go of self-criticism, judgment, being willing to see our imperfection and the imperfection of all of us. So again, these are, to me, these are daily skills that we get to practice. What Ann and I would like for you to do is we're going to have you go into breakouts, all right? And if you would bring with you, and I hope you have them, the questions that were also sent out around the skills. And if each one of you would take turns in your small groups, identifying two of the skills that Anna and I just talked about, and identify two that you would like to improve or to practice, and just discuss them in your small groups. And then we'll come back and we'll open it up for a large group discussion. We're just going to spend pretty much the rest of the time we have together in a large group discussion. So this is an opportunity for you. Somebody just said they had a good discussion. You might want to say more. It's a time for you to throw your voices in.
I was wondering, after this meeting and this class is over, now I know you mentioned, what was it, Whites for Racial Equities? Yes, okay, because I would like to continue this. So is that the place to do it?
I believe that's a really appropriate place. Yes. So, and I see Carol. Carol, you might want to say something because Carol has started attending our meetings. So Carol, would you mind?
Yeah, no, please, I'd love to. So the things that I've most been appreciative of, initially, the thought about being in all white practice groups to practice my speaking and that sort of thing felt a little bit discomforting. And yet it's been quite extraordinary to be in the monthly movie groups and book groups. The discussions are so rich. The space is so open and available. And right now they're doing a series, like a 4-month series on me and white supremacy, which has been really deep and really extraordinary. So I highly recommend it. It's been a deep way for me to get over my fix things, jump in and try and find action, and really being in the space of no, breathe and do some work on yourself, see where you're stuck in this and see what you're doing to perpetuate. And I was just mentioning to my group, JT Mason, one of the founders of that group, puts out an extraordinary racial equity news and events weekly post that has led me in directions that I'm so surprised by. Speakers and books and book discussions and organizations and groups with which I never would have I wouldn't have seen myself as a person who would be invited to participate. So it's been beautiful. Thank you. Thanks for the invitation, Caroline.
Well, because just a few more things about Whites for Racial Equity, it really was an outgrowth of Combined Destinies. So a handful of us so the book that was published in 2013, and in 2015, a handful of us started Whites for Racial Equity. And I just want to say a couple things that Carol mentioned. Both the movie night and the book group are open to all people. So these are multicultural events. The Saturday monthly meeting is really an opportunity for white people to get together and to help ourselves unlearn our racism and then develop becoming better allies. And it was deliberately and intentionally set up that way because a lot of what we need to talk about with ourselves, people of color do not need to hear all of that. They have to deal with enough of it every day. So this is really about us taking responsibility for our own growth and learning and giving each other a hand. So I would invite all of you. And as Carol said, not only the website, but JT puts out, and you'll be immediately invited onto an email blast where you get to see quite a bit of what's going on in our own community. Sometimes it includes things that are in communities a little further flung around getting involved. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I just would want to say that my experience with Whites for Racial Equity has been so helpful. Part of my experience of this is that the feeling of privilege has in it, for me, a lot of feelings of denial, because
Yeah.
it's so, I don't know how to say this, but it so is enmeshed with my own survival skills. I mean, it's like, I'm a person on this earth trying to survive, but it almost goes to the level of competition, and I have shame about that. I'm competing with George Floyd. Hello, I mean, for how I'm impacted by this, and I'm not. But there's this.
You are, you are,
Yeah,
you are impacted by it, just differently. You're not
yeah,
oppressed by it, but you're hurt by it.
yeah,
Uh,
and a lot of the same issues are the same, but they're not on the scale. I mean, I hated my curly hair, but I didn't have the same experience as most Black women did who didn't see themselves in the media. I mean, and I can joke about it and say, well, I didn't like my curly hair until Black is Beautiful came out. And then, oh, and then we started seeing, but that's not the same as a Black woman's self-image of beauty, that.
no, but
So
it was, it probably is related in some way. That straight hair used to be um, the beauty mark for people, is probably related in some way to racism. I wanted to just comment on your statement about denial. I think we all live with some denial in order to be able to survive all of this. So white people seem to deny in different ways. Black people will laugh. What are you going to do? Can't do anything about it. What are you going to do? And so we laugh, or we sing, or we dance, or we make music. It's a way of surviving, and it's been misread ever since Africans were kidnapped and brought here as slaves. The singing and the dancing has been misread. It really is about surviving. And one of the things that I've discovered recently is that when I'm singing, I don't think. And so I sing a lot these days because there's a lot of that, or at least there's a lot of time when I don't want to be thinking about it. And it's been very helpful. I think that in order to be an ally against racism, in order to be an anti-racist activist, or in order to just live in the world without contributing so much and being conscious of what you're contributing to the racist policies that run the system that run this country, it's very important that we be able to be aware of what we are in denial of, and when that we be choosing the times when we're denying it, rather than having it just run us. It's the looking at something and examining it and feeling it and experiencing it that helps us heal. And it's the healing that's going to heal the country, I think.
Hi, thank you. So I'm struggling with the word empathy, and I'd appreciate your opinion. I have been blessed with white privilege, or cursed, whichever the perspective, but experiencing white privilege, isn't it a bit presumptive of me to think I can be empathetic with the trouble and the problems that the Black community have? Can I really know? Can I really feel that trouble?
You can do it. I do remember my husband when he broke into tears when he'd gone with my dad to go fishing, and my father was not. They were not allowed to buy fishing bait in the store in Maryland because my father was Black, and my husband had never seen that, and he loved my dad, or at least he felt connected to him. he broke into tears. I know it's possible for someone who has, and he had experienced white privilege forever, of course, and lived and grew up in a totally white environment in Maine. So I know that it's possible, and I have friends that I have that I believe Caroline can empathize with me based on things that she said. I think she can know what it must be like, what it would be like for her to do the things that I mentioned in the questions that I asked. I would not advise that you talk about knowing how a Black person feels, that you advertise that, but I think that you can imagine, they did that test, that blue eyes, brown eyes test, maybe some of you heard about many years ago in a classroom, where they separated the children in the classroom based on their eye color. And the kids with the brown eyes weren't able to go to the bathroom on their own. They had to ask permission, and the others could leave, and they had all kinds of privileges. They learned what it felt like. So there are ways, and you really have to want to go there. You can't do it though if you stay separated. You have to have enough courage to come into the Black community in some way, to reach out. And it's hard here because the percentage is so small, but it's certainly possible. The Village Project exists and welcomes people. Black churches welcome white people all the time. There are ways to connect with people.
In our small group, one of our members mentioned that their church has been meeting with a group of people about what to do about this systemic racism. And one of the thoughts that occurred to me, and I wanted to ask you two about it, the idea of sister cities. I'm wondering if there might be an idea of sister churches where white churches and Black churches could meet together. If that has been, I'm sure this is not a new idea, but it is something that we could do right here in Monterey County so easily. And not just Black churches, but churches that have a mostly Latino population, or churches that are Asian American. I mean, all of that can cross, and maybe that's already going on.
I think it's a great idea.
I think it's a great idea too.
I think you just begin to act on your idea. You reach out. Just go call, make an appointment, talk to somebody who's running a church that you think you might want to connect with, to explore the idea with that person.
And to ask around. I'm not aware that that's happening locally, but it doesn't mean it's not. So I think just starting to find out what is and isn't happening, and then your idea, you can birth it.
It'll be my first child.
Well, then don't wait too long.
Amazing that I could become pregnant at this age.
Yeah. One of the things about acting, of course, as you all know, is that we feel less grief when we're doing something. And even things that look small to us make a difference. And everything we do matters. And everything we don't do also matters. So I really encourage you to act on your instincts about those things. Don't keep those brilliant ideas to yourself. The country needs you, and you need you, because it's really a hurtful system. Nobody is free from it, from the hurt, even if they don't realize it.
If people are interested in using Combined Destinies in your life, the back of the book has a reader's guide that has a number of questions to assist with what I would say continuing the conversation that we've gotten to have today.